has to do with the role that business can be playing in trying to address key global business issues. I'm Robert Greenhill, the World Economic Forum, and I'm really delighted to have an extraordinary panel with me here today to discuss this issue. And you know, over the last few years, there's been around the world a challenging of the role of business, whether it's in terms of perceptions of taking on excess risks, not being sensitive to environmental or social challenges, not providing the opportunities people want. And so there have been important debates about business as a problem. But there's also another narrative which says business as a key part of the solution to many of these global issues. And the reason why President Calderon and Alejandro Ramirez have played this instrumental role in creating the B20 here is the sense that the issues today are too complex and too interrelated for governments alone to be able to truly understand, whether it's on issues of climate change or food security or green growth, the challenges, let alone put in place the solutions. That the world is going from a G20 to an M20, and that business has a very important role in terms of a multi-stakeholder world in addressing many of these issues. But that's easier said than done. And this is a challenging world for businesses and business leaders, ensuring that they can show that they're delivering the results that their shareholders require as well. So what is the right role for business to play? And how do business leaders balance these important roles that they're playing as business leaders and as broader corporate global citizens? To discuss the conversation today, let me start with Carlos Slim Domit of Grupo Carson. Carlos, how do you as a business leader look at this question of the role business should be playing on broader issues? And maybe more directly, why should business be looking at these issues at all, rather than just focusing it on their specific balance sheet, their specific business needs?
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here for our talk. I think that before going into the answer to your question, it's very important to understand the stage we are living now in the world. We are entering a new era. We are all fully aware of that. And it's very important to understand which paradigms this new era brings. Now, in the agricultural era, it was not casual that the power was concentrated in one person. Now you have the economical, the political, the social, the economical power concentrated either in the kings, in the emperors, in the Tlatoanis, in our country, etc. It was an era that was very dependent on territories. You need more territories so you can have more food and more raw materials. Then they came the industrial era, and mainly was an era that shows that the society was transforming from being rural to being urban. Not only the production process, but also the society interacting with each other, start to make institutions, social institutions such as the unions, for example, to defend labor rights, political parties, to compete for who offers the best expectancy to society, and government start to change and society start to change. In this new era, the paradigms are different. It's an era where we are seeing many new concepts that we didn't have before, such as democracy, such as competition, globalization, human rights, and many others. Plurality, intense competition internationally everywhere. And it's an era where territories are not important anymore. What is important is the markets. And to have a strong markets, what the countries need to do is to have more people coming into their markets and being able to be participating of the economy for everyone. It's especially an era that is going to be sustained in the welfare of the others. That means that social development is not only just a moral issue, it's also an economical need for societies and economical need for countries. Regarding that, companies are getting a much important role in this side. The way to solve poverty, we have seen that charity helps to attenuate but doesn't solve poverty. What solves poverty is employment. And to get a better source for employment, you need better education. And to be able to be educated, you need a good health. So I think that the importance in the business community to get involved in social problems or in social development issues, it means to have more people in the market, better prepared, and with a better capacity and part of the economical system. Today we're in a stage where the crisis, for the first time in my generation, are in the developed countries, not in underdeveloped countries. From the other side, underdeveloped countries, we have a good economical situation. We have very low interest rates in long-term basis, so it's a time where we can finance big development programs, and we have a lot to do. Before, a lot of issues that used to be the lags that holds countries to develop, today are opportunities for development. The lack of infrastructure, the lack of social development in many areas, and especially the lack of employment and the lack of growth today is an opportunity to bring more people into the market.
I mean, one of the two things that strike me to that. One is this idea, instead of just trying to go and conquer existing markets, to actually create new markets by creating a new group of consumers who have the education and the income to be actually participate in the marketplace. And that creates massive new markets. But the second one, too, is all these challenges of infrastructure, of other support, are also a tremendous opportunity from a business point of view and also a social development point of view if they're tackled in that kind of a way. Now, let me turn to Paul Polman, CEO of Unilever. You've been passionately engaged in the whole debate around companies as corporate global citizens. You're here now making a major contribution to B20. You'll be going down to Rio. Why do you get engaged in this? Why do you think it's important for you as a CEO or for Unilever as a corporation to get involved? And how do you justify that when shareholders are saying, hey, you should be focusing on the next quarter?
Well, I'm not sure all shareholders say that, but I'll get to that in a second. I think coming back to Carlos, first of all, you hear a lot of doomsday scenarios if you walk around meetings in Europe or some of the meetings here, and yet we live in a time probably of more opportunities than ever. You have 2 billion more consumers coming in the world, lots of people entering middle class. We've never had such a broad base of educated people in the world, young, dynamic people in many parts of the world that want to advance. A demand for a green economy, whoever can figure that out has a market open for him or her that you wouldn't believe. So enormous opportunities, yet at the same time there are incredible challenges. First of all, we've all had the challenge to our system, which we call capitalism. The sad part is, if you go back to the origins of capitalism, it was actually based on generosity. It was specializing to take care of the greater good, which each individual could not do. And for some reason we have forgotten that. And I think it's important that we bring that back to business. Business itself cannot just be a mere bystander in a system that gives it life. And what you've seen with Occupy Wall Street movements and other things, if too many people in our society feel that they are excluded or not benefit from the system that we've created, it's not a system that's in equilibrium, and it's not a system that is going to last. And it will affect businesses. I always like to quote Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning, where he says when they built the Statue of Liberty on the east coast of the United States, they forgot to build the Statue of Responsibility on the west coast. You cannot have the liberty that we have as businesses without having the responsibility. And that responsibility is now needed more than ever. We have enormous challenges ahead of us. A political challenge. Nobody seems to be talking to each other anymore. We have an austerity challenge in Europe. We have a green growth or abundancy challenge. We have an equity challenge where people want to be included. So the challenges are enormous. And they've been created with a system that is not going to provide the solution. And if we as businesses don't step up, start working differently with others, take co-responsibility of these issues, I think we're going to live in a society that we will not be successful either. And that's why it's absolutely important for business to get involved. Just one quick issue. You take climate change itself. I reckon that Unilever last year alone probably had 250 million euros cost in climate change because of the droughts in Kenya or China or the floodings in Thailand. So if we don't get involved, There's still 950 million people going to bed hungry every night, not knowing if they would wake up. There's a child dying every 6 seconds. That child is a consumer. That child is a human being. And we, as businesses, will not succeed if we don't fix these problems. So that's why you need to take core responsibility. It's a moral obligation, but it is also a business duty. And what you find is, if you internalize that, certainly as a consumer goods company that we are, you internalize these responsibilities, you get closer to society, you get closer to the issues of society, you actually find opportunities to grow. Interestingly, Unilever has never grown so fast. Now, if shareholders don't understand that, I always say to shareholders, why would you invest in a company that isn't responsible or co-responsible for the problems? Why would you invest in a company that pollutes this environment? Why do you invest in a company that uses more scarce resources than this world can replenish? So ask the question to people that don't have a socially responsible business model. Unfortunately, what we find is more and more investors are buying into our story. Obviously, you have to deliver results, but there is no trade-off here.
You know, it's interesting when we're having this conversation on the outskirts of the G20, and in a sense, you know, the G20 is a new manifestation in economic terms of the approach that was taken with the formation of the United Nations and the Security Council after World War II, when the big challenge facing the world was war or conflict. And the sense was governments create conflict, governments can solve conflict. So a gathering of governments is a pretty good thing if the Security Council needs to focus on issues that are controlled by governments. When you're looking at the issues you were just mentioning, Paul, they transcend governments, and this idea of actually bringing all the different actors together to be part of the solution is probably the right gathering for the right challenge today. Now, Daniele Servite of Grupo Bimbo every day, you know, feeds millions of people here in Mexico and Latin America, but you've now been involved with Paul on trying to deal with this challenge globally of food security. How are you thinking about that, and why did you decide as a CEO that it was the right thing to be focusing time and energy on?
Well, Bob, I would say that first, CEOs are normal people. We care about our families, we care about our teams in the company, we care about our countries, and we care about issues that everybody cares about. Yeah. So why shouldn't we? The second thing is that we also, I would say, have a broader context than politicians. We have a longer cycle of life, I would say. And in that sense, some of the things that we start working on as businesses can transcend those cycles. And then I would say that we could have a little bit more influence and more stability on some of these problems that sometimes we see a lot of faces changing on the other side of the table. The third thing is that large companies are increasing its relevance and its influence on the world. And I think that businesses also have to have this long-term view on the problems that are affecting society, and more importantly, the ones that are affecting their business also. And that's why, in this case, Paul and I got into this issue of trying to understand the food security challenges. And personally, I can tell you that I learned a lot by working in the task force. I had a chance to meet people that otherwise I wouldn't have the opportunity to meet. That allowed me to reflect on the policies that companies should have on this issue. And by doing that, I would say that we were able to sort of start working on subjects that are important for the company in the long run, and also that allow us to have an influence in issues that are important for us as people.
Really, I mean, that whole point of not only the understanding of the issue, but the long-term engagement that CEOs can provide, that corporations can provide, but I also really like this idea that by engaging in this, there's also a mutual learning that goes on. Mm-hmm. That it's not just a one-way street. There's a whole new understanding of the context and an appreciation of how, you know, one can be constructively involved in that. And Jeff Jarvis, you've been very involved globally on the issues of employment, skills gap, but you've also been involved in many other issues as a corporate global citizen. What do you think is driving this engagement of corporate leaders in these challenging issues?
Well, you know, if you look back for years, I mean, you can go back and look at Ford Motor back, 40 years ago, and they were involved in communities. But what has happened is that there has been a commingling of where your employee, where the company, and where society fits together. It's actually gotten closer together. So when you look from an employee perspective, who works until 10 at night on a laptop and are traveling around the world and having social dialogue in between the conversations with the companies, they're expecting companies, and companies are expecting from the individuals to actually become true global citizens, or actually community citizens. And companies in some ways are being forced into it. In other ways, there is a practicality that, for many years, if you're in Europe, you talk about the social partners, and the social partners were really a way to force entities together, force conversation. And my sense is it's now becoming a natural dialogue. And if companies are not in that natural dialogue in an authentic way, giving money is not social responsibility. Giving money is part of social responsibility. It's involving your brains. Kind of what we talk about in our company is brains will come before brawn, and the brawn is the money. So we will inject ourselves with what we know, how we do. It energizes our workforce, and then the money follows. And we really see that as a way of not only giving back, but creating, as our company, is somebody who through employment leads to the success, not just next quarter, next year, but 2, 3, 4 years out. And I jump a little on and agree with what Paul had said, was that shareholders are really interested in quarterly earnings, more so than ever before. And the view on that is, and the statement we make, is management is the longest shareholders of anyone. And we're interested in what happens 5, 10, 15 years from now. So let's act like that and let the financials fold out from there. So I think it's this co-mingling, this connectivity that has said there's a deeper responsibilities for companies to connect throughout a 24-hour a day on life, work, business, and giving back to community.
I mean, this is really interesting, this idea that because with the BlackBerry and everything else, employees are actually thinking about business issues on evenings, on weekends, and so the professional element has gone into their personal life. But I understand you're also saying the opposite is true. Therefore, their personal values are going into their professional space. They're not going to distinguish between the two and say, I'm going to act one way as a human being, as you say, in the corporation, and another way at home. And so all of a sudden, the standard in terms of values that the professional, their professional experience is being measured against is of a different nature. I mean, are you actually seeing that when you're looking at your surveys, your other analyses of employees, and how's that changing, Jeff?
Yes, we're seeing that. We interview about 12 million people a year and put about 4 million to work. It is amazing how many high-level, great-paying jobs are turned down by individuals because they say, I'm not going to work at that company because I don't believe in what they stand for. That's a powerful statement. Now, when my son graduates from university, I'm going to probably not give him that opportunity because he needs to make money. But in all seriousness, there is a different level of consciousness. And, you can look at the global leaders at World Economic Forum, the young leaders, and across the board. So there's a different way of looking at businesses. And frankly, I think businesses can respond in a hugely positive way. It's just articulating what are the advantages we have and what do we do. And it goes back to being authentic. If you say I gave $1 million to the Olympics in London, it's not going to go very far. If you talk about how you've actually intertwined work with business and giving back to community, you're going to be one of those companies that those great talents are going to say, I want to work there. Our survey shows 25% of people under 25, number 2 criteria is what does the business do and are they connected to communities?
Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can only echo what Jeff says. If you look at the 2008 crisis, it's called a financial crisis, but really it was a crisis of ethics, and not many rules were broken and not many people went to jail, but lots of ethic rules were broken. Rules that we didn't question when the stock market went up 15% every year, rules we didn't question when the internet was not as powerful to connect us and voice opinions. But people caught on. People caught on before business did, before politicians did. And what we did in Unilever, we simply changed the premise of our business model with a small word but a significant difference. we felt that most businesses operated under the principle of how could they use society and the environment to be successful. And we just said very simply, let's just change the word use to give. How can we give to society and the environment to be successful? Why can't we establish a business model that actually uses less resources? Why can't we establish a business model that gives a more equitable growth? Hence, in our case, Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, 500,000 incremental smallhold farmers, food security activities. Internalize that into your business model and become a force for good. And increasingly what you can see is that as businesses you do that, you expand your circle of influence. Instead of a policy taker, you become a policy maker. You're a business that leads. And consumers see this. The world has become very, very transparent. We saw an incredible lift in our employee engagement because it has a stronger purpose, to Jeff's point. But we see an incredible lift also into the corporate brand and the connectivity with consumers. Consumers, after the crisis, are bringing family values back. They call retro. You see it in the old toasters or the PT Cruisers. They are going back to the old values, the values that were actually the values that we grew up with. I was born in 1956 after the Second World War, family of 6 children. My father worked in a factory, but the only thing that counted for him was for us to go to university, for us to have a better life than they had, for us not to experience the things that they experienced during a war. And it was for the greater good. Then our generation, we hate to say, just forgot that. And I think it's time again to go back to these values that brought us here in the first place. And businesses that do that in an increasingly transparent world will be rewarded by consumers. Businesses that don't do that will be dinosaurs very soon. And we're seeing that happening. If you can bring down a regime in Egypt in 17 days, we organize on Facebook, we communicate on Twitter, we show the world what we do on YouTube. It took 17 days. They always had corruption, they always had volatile food prices, they always had a high youth unemployment. Why 17 days? If they can bring down a regime in Egypt in 17 days, they can bring down an irresponsible company in nanoseconds. And it's starting to happen all around us. And if companies don't understand that and don't participate with different business models, at a time, admittedly, when the political climate is very, very difficult, then I think investors should worry very sincerely about those companies. And that's the message that we're sending out there.
So in fact, there's not just the pull from the employees, there's also in the sense of values, but also the sense of strategitic risk engagement that says, this is not an option in terms of acting in transparency.
There's no better signal than the marketplace, always.
And I'm intrigued by the point, Jeff, that you made, and Paul, you emphasized this issue of, giving money may play a useful role, but that's actually not the most important role. It's how do you actually engage. And let me, when you're looking at with Grupo Bimbo and the kind of role that you're playing, how do you decide and where do you decide to actually try to make a difference in this broader way that we're talking about?
Well, I would say that definitely we're a 66-year-old company, very, very strongly connected in Mexico to Mexican society. So I would say that what we have is projects and views that transcend more than a 1 year or 2 year program. So whatever we get into, we try to get into with a long-term perspective. And I would say that helps because countries and companies do want to have strong roots in society. So that's our view, and that's the way we try to implement our programs. Nevertheless, situations change, and for example, in our case, we've tried to become a little bit more active on sustainability, on the environmental part, and I would say that we try to come out with things that are good for the business as well, and at the end of the day, that helps build a case for investors. We've become involved in packaging reduction, in oxo-degradability, and when we do that, we try to connect with society and to see benefits from society. At the end of the day, I would say that businesses need to be upfront in communicating with their consumers and making a case for business. At least in Mexico, we've come with for many years with a sort of a very negative reaction from society about big businesses. And if we want to help solve or participate in the solutions of global challenges, businesses have to be very proactive and very public, and they have to show a face that it's different from the one that generally the press portrays. And that's also a role that we need to play. Otherwise, if we keep on the sideline, if we just do our own thing, society will be having an image of businesses that not necessarily the one that brings growth and employment and prosperity. So that's our view, that we have issues that connect with our business. We try to be very public about those, and we have a long-term perspective on these issues, so that we at the end of the day have residual connections with the consumers on these values.
You know, it's interesting because there's really these very two powerful levers as leaders that you have, which is the one as CEOs, the tremendous influence you have over the actions of your company and how you can support people and doing the right things within your organization. And then in this role as corporate global citizens, where it's not just what do I do within this context, it's how can I constructively help shape or change the context. And I mean, in a sense, the B20 has been about not just CEOs as individual leaders, but collectively engaging to try to improve the context. And Carlos, the ICT and Innovation Task Force has really been focusing on that issue. And are there a couple of elements of what you and your colleagues have been focusing on that you think are particularly powerful or constructive?
Yes, Bob. This new era that I was talking about is fundamented in ICT. ICT is at the end the nervous system of this new era, is what brings everybody connected, is what gives access to people to many things and access to society. In our case, it was a very good job because we were people from all the different types of the industry, from hardware, infrastructure development, telecom providers, software companies, etc. We were even competitors inside the group, and it was working on a common agenda on how to make ICT relevant for everyone. Mm-hmm. The possibility of bringing the people into this new era connected and to be able to participate is what the end of the agenda is for. It's about inclusion, it's about access, and it's about helping to create the conditions so everybody can have a very strong participation and a fast implementation of the programs to be involved in this new era that I was talking about. Then all the things that come together with that, because from one side is the access, the connection, but the other is how can we close gaps in very short time of what could take more than one generation. For example, in education, the possibility of being connected to have digital education programs that can be common in the world is going to help closing the gaps between countries. It's going to help faster to come into a better stage in the educational process, but also it's going to help to adapt education to the new job demands that the companies have. There are many jobs that are being created that education still is not prepared for that, and doing it through digital literacy is going to help as well to update quicker and in a more accurate way the needs between education and job demands. And at the end, ICT is fundamental for persons, is fundamental for business, and is fundamental for the countries.
You know, and it's really interesting. So this idea that business engaged as corporate global citizens can help directly solve many critical issues like the contribution to dealing with food security and so on. But actually, by coming together collaboratively across the supply chain on issues such as ICT and empowerment, you can actually create the conditions for education, for other elements. So it's an enabling context for actually other development as well. I mean, this issue of the skills gap and how does one help reform education systems and processes so that there's a lifelong dynamic learning to allow people to become re-equipped for the rapidly changing business environment seems to be one of the key challenges. I know that some of the research that has come out has shown at the same time there's a massive unemployment rate, there's also a significant and growing unmet need for employees because of this skills gap. Jeff, your group on unemployment had focused a lot on this issue. Maybe you should give us a sense of what that is, and also what role are you calling on business to be playing to help not just identify the problem, but maybe come up with some of the solutions here?
Sure. I'll cover that, but I just want to use this as an opportunity of what we try to do within our organization and connecting our social responsibility to how all of our people act. So I actually go back to my room every night and craft what we call a postcard from the B20. And I talk about all of the elements that we have talked about and how they should be proud of what we do in employment and how we do that. And that goes to 40,000 people in 80 different countries. And the responses you get back, because they feel as though we're actually giving back. I'm nothing but the custodian. I'm the one who gets to, I don't send them pictures of the beaches, by the way. I send them, you know, the wall-less or the windowless conference rooms. But I think that that's an important way of creating the connection. On our employment task force, we've been working since Davos 13. Education clearly is one of them. And we believe that businesses who have for a long time worked with education needs to take a deeper dive into it. They need to be able to say there is a skills gap, and education by definition cannot change their curriculum fast enough to keep up with the changes of businesses. But the ability to adopt an educational institution, 4, 5, 6 businesses adopt it, bring their talent, in other words, our employees, our associates, into the universities, into the technical training centers, and use that as our people's development, but then also use it as a way to have, when they graduate, when they get their attainment, they're ready to go employees. So that's one. The other is, that's closely aligned to that, is we have, as a business community, been too selective on internships and apprenticeships. It is the way to, one of the big ways to reduce youth unemployment is to get them into the workforce. Not do it for free, which, by the way, you can actually pull off free internships right now because those poor young people out there are willing to get anything from experience. We say quality, good-paying internships, and businesses have a key part of that. The other is small, medium-sized enterprises contribute to about 60 to 70% of new employment. We all have small, medium-sized companies that are in our supply chain. There are tens and tens of thousands of companies potentially in our supply chains. Why don't you take some of those out? Talk to them about management techniques. Talk to them about technology. How can they become better? How do they performance plan their people? And see that business grow from 5 to 10 to 15, and do it potentially by you buying more for them because their quality of their product went up, not just because you feel sorry for them because that's not sustainable. So those are a few things that we've worked on.
And Jeff, one of the very specific things you're calling upon is for businesses to look to increase their apprenticeships by 20%. Is that correct?
20%. So I will be standing by the door at the end, so taking orders for 20% increase internships and apprenticeships. Look, folks, it's a great idea. You need them anyway. You're going to need them as part of what you need to do. Get better internship, get better apprenticeships, and we separate those because trade skills, #1 hardest to fill. Trade skills are losing honor. It is honorable to be a plumber and an electrician, and we're losing some of that, and you can play a major role in that.
Well, what's interesting is there's the focus of the task force, part on this idea of education for employment, working with the technical colleges and others to actually ensure that people come out of colleges with the right skills to start. But what's interesting is also actually saying, you know, education through employment. That actually, for in many cases, it's giving these young people the chances through the internship, through the apprenticeship, to build the mindset and the skill set they need to succeed later on, which is the critical missing part right now when we look at the, you know, the almost 50% unemployment rates in some countries such as Spain and others, and massive unemployment rates for youth elsewhere.
You've got to get in the flow, and I think one of the things that we're all uncomfortable with, or at least many of us, is lifelong learning used to be a really cool term. Lifelong learning is a mandate for you to keep a employability through life. So how companies can create lifetime learning by giving them additional opportunities, not just raises, but broaden their responsibilities, will be saving society and your company in just 2, 3, 4 years out.
Now, let me just, if there are microphones here, I wonder if we can actually get some comments or questions from the audience, because we not only have great leaders here, we have great leaders throughout this room, which is why you're all here. First of all, do we have microphones? And could someone, if anyone wants to make a quick comment or has a question? Please, Nicholas. Do we have a microphone at the front, please? If you could please identify yourself and...
Nicolás Mariscal from Mexico. My question is related, we've been hearing about corporate social responsibility, mainly here with the major companies here. But my question goes, what Jeff was just mentioned a few minutes ago, you were talking about the chain, the people that you could influence in the companies. But what about the smaller companies that are getting started or are on the way, which are most in our underdeveloped world, or coming, as Carlos was mentioning, the world has changed a lot today. And now, what would be your advice for smaller companies that are starting to get involved in corporate social responsibility?
Great. Yeah, great question. Why don't we take a couple of comments or questions and then come back. So host, how do the small and medium enterprises get involved in this? Please, the gentleman here.
Thank you. Bayazit from TÜSİAD, Turkey. I have a question for Mr. Polman. You said 2008 crisis is actually a crisis of ethics. What are the three major things that will change from here on in terms of ethics of conduct of business as a result of this crisis? Thank you.
These are the kind of focused questions I expect from a business owner. Any other questions, comments? I think that's enough to keep the panel going for a while. So on the issue of how do small and medium enterprises get involved in this, and what role should the larger corporations play on this? And then, okay, so what's going to be different in terms of the ethics going forward? Who wants to start with that first?
I'll give it a short start. I think it goes back to even our philosophy, which is brains before brawn. Too many times companies think that social responsibility is when the foundation for GM builds a new school for $100 million. That's great. I'm glad they did it. But small, medium-sized enterprises, either through some kind of cohort group with their own community, have incredible amount of knowledge. And what we do, for example, is when you become a certain level in our performance appraisal system, you are now allowed to do 10 hours a week of service during work days. You must achieve a certain performance level. Small, medium-sized businesses can do that as well. We have bigger numbers, so in our report, it's tens of thousands of people to do that. But small, medium-sized enterprises in a local community can make a big difference, and money can come later. And I think when you separate money from contributing to the furthering of a community, they have much better chance of being involved and should be involved.
I think that two other key points for SMBs is one, the regulation. I think as far as governments and processes starts to get more digitalized and simplify the process for developing and operating new businesses, is going to help a lot to promote new businesses coming. The other is financing. We are on a stage where interest rates are very low. Interest rates are very low for long terms. And companies can access, big corporations that can access to these markets can transfer this credit to their vendors. They can transfer these credits to their suppliers and to the small and medium businesses. Creating new programs and new figures to foster financing to SMBs. Also with technology, with all the new services coming in the clouds, for example, the help to businesses not to need to invest in so many things and to have everything accessible, not only in the amount of having hosting of web pages and commercial processes, also all the applications that can help businesses to promote better themselves with people, and of course the access. Today a small business connected to the internet, the reach of new customers, the reach of new markets they can have is a very big opportunity. So what we need to do is to foster this, to give the tools that they need, which is regarding financing, the regulation, and supporting the chain. And as we are seeing, the most important companies were created in less than 5 years ago, and we see this process coming over and over. The opportunities in this new connected world is very important, and what we need to continue doing is fostering these opportunities, giving the right tools for SMBs to develop.
Yeah. It's really interesting also. A number of the recommendations across the different task forces have talked about large corporations using their global supply chain to actually engage and empower the small and medium enterprises at different steps in terms of the responsibilization of them, engaging with smallholder farmers in the food security, but also, of course, with the Chambers of Commerce, International Chamber of Commerce and the National Business Federations who are actually in this room. They have a capacity to engage small and medium enterprises very significantly. So in terms of the ecosystem here, there's a chance to do it. And the Transparency and Anti-Corruption Task Force actually has it as a priority, because it's one thing for the large corporations to adopt world-class practices in transparency and anti-corruption, but for small and medium enterprises it's extremely important in terms of also ensuring that they are protected from the risk of inappropriate behavior. So it's one of the very specific recommendations of the Anti-Corruption Task Force that governments and large companies share best practices with small and medium enterprises in a simple and doable fashion. Let me turn to this other question, which is, okay, so if it was a challenge of ethics in 2008, what's different? What should be different? And by the way, how will the world know that things are different?
At least I had the benefit to think about it a little bit. But let me just go back to this first point, because it's very important what you raised. Responsible capitalism for equitable and sustainable growth has nothing to do with size. It starts with all of us individuals. You cannot have an ethical company if you don't have an ethical leadership team. You cannot have an ethical Marriott if you don't have that transparency and that trust and that is required in that relationship to make it sustainable. So small or big companies have nothing to do with it. We should get out of some of these comparisons to break these paradigms, to be honest. There are no restrictions for doing the right thing in life. We've been brought up like that, fortunately, in many places in the world. We've just forgotten to exercise it. Which brings me back to the 2008 crisis, because there are probably 3 or 4 things that are changing, and it is probably back not to what people call the new normal, but the old normal. I think the first thing is that enough people are starting to realize that they have to become a responsible part of society and play a role in that. You see a lot of leaders changing, taking a longer term view. Companies like ours have stopped quarterly reporting, stopped giving guidance, changing compensation systems. There's enough critical mass of leaders that say, hey, the way we do business has to be slightly differently. And that really comes back then to driving a stronger purpose in business. So I think more and more people are values driven and purpose led, and you saw that also with what Jeff is saying, and you see that definitely. The second thing you see is that people realize that the issues we're facing are just too big to handle by ourselves, or as Einstein would say, at the level that they've been created. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So we have to work differently. People start talking about the golden triangle of government, civil society and business. That's why we're here as well. That's what we're doing in Rio this end of this week. You have to work differently, and you have to take co-responsibility, and you see more cross-industry cooperation going on. We're moving quite rapidly to a moratorium on deforestation. Deforestation is 16% of global warming. We don't need rocket science to shoot people to Mars to solve the CO2 emission. One of the big things we need to do is stop illegal deforestation. Now, it's also good for food security. It actually gives us a long-term supply for businesses like ours. But you have to work with the World Bank, you have to work with the WTO, you have to work with governments, you have to work with industry coalitions, roundtables of sustainable palm oil, I don't know what. You have to have the energy to do that. But there is no alternative. I cannot go home and look my kids in the eye and say, we keep stealing from you for the future and we have that right to use all these resources. More people understand that. So first one is purpose, second one is partnership, and the third one is the most important one, which is transparency. People have understood that. There are now, the web in the US, for example, change.org is one of the biggest growing websites. You know, those are the guys that got Netflix to reverse their $5 increase or Bank of America's fees. Earth Day now has 2 billion participants around the world. When Oscar Morales in Colombia said the FARC is enough, he had millions of people on the street. The consumers have discovered, especially the young consumers have discovered, this enormous power of connectivity, which is a very positive thing if it is a force for good. If it just leads to frustration, like we've seen with Occupy Wall Street, and no solution, it turns into a negative thing. So no better opportunity, once more, for businesses to connect, to become transparent, to invite these consumers in and offer solutions. It's enormous. It's enormous. When we, for example, one of our brands is Lipton. And an individual consumer will think, well, I'm powerless. I might want to have a good tea, a fair trade tea, a tea that they handle the people in the tea plantations very well, a sustainable tea. But if I only have this little bag, how can I make a difference in this humongous world? We say that's not the case anymore. You're all connected. In fact, a company like ours has 2 billion consumers using our products every day. We said, you're connected. If you ask for it, multiply by 2 billion, you're a force for good. That connectivity is enormously powerful to drive change. If you as companies then fill that vacuum, offer solutions, you're up and running. But it requires transparency. It requires transparency. We've never put more data out there. We've never opened up our challenges to the world than we've ever done before. That's uncomfortable for lots of people, but that's the only way we're going to solve it. Purpose, partnership, transparency. And then simply walking the talk.
We've heard some, very powerful messages, I think, from these four panelists. Let me leave with one other message, which is a message of thanks. I mean, for all of you to come here hasn't been easy in your very busy times and your very busy schedules. But I think what we heard today is, while engaging in this kind of process like the B20 isn't easy or straightforward, it's absolutely necessary. It's the way in which we can collectively be engaged in actually trying to solve these problems and taking the power of purpose behind many of these leaders to actually solve these broader global issues. So, in closing, let me thank the panelists, but also let me thank all of you for having been involved in engaging business in a positive way to help address these global solutions. Thank you very much.